That's the sound of today's wildlife restoration triumph. Ruffed grouse. Tomorrow, it may be the sight of trumpeter's swans in the sky or river otters in the creek. Missouri has enough grouse now for a hunting season. And we know the dramatic success of Missouri's wild turkey restoration. And in the fall, the return of the white-tailed deer is apparent to hundreds of thousands of deer hunters. It hasn't always been this way. The Ozark Hills were cut over, and the native prairies were plowed. Market hunters had decimated the historic wildlife wealth. In the spring, the woods burned, and the air was thick with our outdoors going up in smoke. Things couldn't get much worse. They could only get better.
We started trapping deer on the Skaggs Ranch in Taney County, but all we could trap was does. We took them around to these refuges we'd already set up. The refuges had a number 9 wire around them, and they were big. And they included a lot of private farms. Maybe one refuge might have 2 or 3 farms in it. But we'd contact the people in there, and they thought that was wonderful. We'd tell them what we was doing. And they said that we'll help you watch the deer, so they won't know where to get them.
Back in 1937, the newly formed Department of Conservation had a big job: to bring back the white-tailed deer. There were only a couple thousand deer left in Missouri. The department established refuges and began the long fight to stop forest fires. Conservation agents, often working under terrible conditions, brought law to the backwoods.
They established a series of forest refuges, and the intent was to build up deer populations to the point where they could be trapped and transported to other parts of the state.
The refuge managers lived a tough life. One had a quarter-mile hike just to get water, and none had electricity.
And it was just kind of a rule of thumb that we had that after a county had been stocked for 5 years, that it would be open for hunting.
When the fires stopped, both forests and deer began coming back. The first modern hunting season was in 1944, and the first doe season in 1951. We've come from a harvest of 94 deer in 1944 to more than 100,000 now. A success story? Yes, an incredible one. There's a sound to quicken the heartbeat, the rattling challenge of a wild turkey gobbler. But without a dramatic restoration project, we wouldn't hear it. The pioneers didn't bother to raise tame turkeys. The woods were full of wild birds for the taking. But by the 1930s, there were only a few thousand turkeys left in the deepest, most remote hollows of the Ozarks.
One of the worst problems we had was open range. Hogs and cows running loose in the woods. They'd compete with turkeys for food and destroy their nesting sites. Peck Ranch was really established as an area to manage and increase wild turkey populations. But before we could trap and transplant wild turkeys as we did deer, we had to learn how to catch them.
These two men, Herb Dill, the manager at Swan Lake National Wildlife Refuge, and his assistant Howard Thornsberry, found the answer. They developed the Cannon net in the mid-1950s, and it revolutionized turkey trapping nationwide. Now, trappers could bait turkeys and shoot the net over them. Instead of catching one turkey at a time, they could bag a dozen or more. The Conservation Department has trapped wild turkeys for 30 years. More than 3,000 released in 87 counties.
We've been successful in restoring wild turkeys, so successful, in fact, that we use them as trading coins. We trade them to other states for river otters, ruffed grouse, and even prairie plant seed.
Turkeys truly are an unparalleled restoration success story, and they're helping lead to similar successes with other wildlife species. No restoration just happens. Wildlife managers have to find out what makes a particular animal tick. They study habitat. They find out what foods creatures eat and how they live.
You had to read history books to learn about Missouri otters. There were a few left before we began to restore them, but no more than a handful of Missourians had ever seen one, including those of us who were in charge of bringing them back.
River otters are appealing, but more than that, they're historic in Missouri. Otters were trapped for their fur, and the unregulated hunting and draining of marshes reduced them to near extinction. Down here, in the remnants of Missouri's once huge boot-heel swamp, a few otters survive, but not enough to repopulate the state's riverways.
Wildlife swamps are one of the neatest management tools we have. And what could be more American than swamping? Deciding how many turkeys one otter's worth or how many grouse we get for each turkey. It's horse trading. Only we trade turkeys for otters.
The first trade was 32 Missouri turkeys sent to Kentucky. Kentucky bought 20 otters from a commercial trapper in Louisiana. That was in 1982. And since then, we've released nearly 300 otters. It's almost certain that our released otters are reproducing. And it looks as if, once again, river otters will be residents of many, if not most, of the state's river systems. Some animals we take for granted today, like the beaver. Once scarce, they've now become so numerous in some areas, they can create a problem. But beavers also once were in short supply in the Missouri outdoors, and they've thrived in modern Missouri because of good wildlife management and public concern. Pheasants never were native to Missouri. They're an exotic, brought to America more than a century ago. And they're one of the few exotics to have made themselves welcome. Most have become pests. Witness the starling, English sparrow, or gypsy moth. Pheasants have been a pleasant surprise, and trades with Iowa have given us enough birds to stock new areas and extend our present pheasant range. Pioneers called ruffed grouse woods pheasants, but they aren't pheasants. And unlike ringneck pheasants, ruffed grouse are native to Missouri. Eastern hunters call them partridge and cherish them above all game birds. By 1937, the estimate was there were only 100 left in Missouri. The same problems that plagued turkeys also plagued grouse, loss of a place to live. But it's been tougher for grouse to come back because they're more specific in what they need than turkeys are.
We released the first wild-trap grouse in central Missouri in 1959, and today that area is probably the heart of some of the best grouse hunting in the state.
Game farm birds just didn't work. It took wild-trapped birds.
We're working with foresters today to create grouse habitat by making small clear cuts every 10 years or so. That way we're making sure that within the forest there will always be young stands for ruffed grouse to use. However, when we're managing a forest like this, we're also making sure that we leave some old trees and some in pole size. We're hoping that at least 70% of Missouri's counties will have grouse, with our releases being scattered across the state. We're moving in this direction.
Restoration today is easier to monitor with tools like these tiny transmitters, which can be attached or even surgically implanted in animals. Managers need to know where animals go and what they need to manage them effectively.
We found some geese that we thought were different than the normal geese that we see that migrated to the state. And they were on a farm between Columbia and Jefferson City. And some of them were nesting on top of haystacks. And so I started building tubs, and we built tubs and put them out. And the first year we put the tubs up, those geese were fighting over them, and it was automatic, you know. And these birds were all pinion birds. They couldn't fly, so we had to build catwalks, you know, from the water up to the edge of the tub. And it was amazing to watch those birds walk up those catwalks and jump in those tubs.
Wildlife managers keep a close watch on Missouri's native nesting goose flock, which now numbers at least 10,000 birds. Trumpeter swans are magnificent birds, the largest North American waterfowl. They can weigh more than 30 pounds and have a wingspan of 8 feet. Trumpeters probably nested in Missouri, and they were common migrants through here. Lewis and Clark saw them.
We've been working with swans since 1982. We pick up swans at La Creek National Wildlife Refuge in South Dakota and take them to Mingo National Wildlife Refuge in southeast Missouri. We're also beginning to release birds in other parts of the state.
There they go. Oh, there they go, Shane. Oh,
Swans are tough to establish. They fall victim to many perils. But perhaps someday, we again will see these magnificent birds in the Missouri skies. A major restoration success story is that of the bald eagle, our national symbol. Once threatened by pesticides, the eagle today graces the skies in comfortable numbers. In Missouri, the Conservation Department and the federal government have cooperated in raising young eagles to the flight stage in so-called hacking towers. It's a thrilling moment when another eagle joins his peers in the clouds. And now, eagles are nesting in the wild in Missouri for the first time in decades. The eagle has returned, perhaps the ultimate symbol of wildlife restoration projects.